Settled back into a rural way of life, Carmarthen has new housing developments for a population which mostly works elsewhere. Baglan is a part of Port Talbot that did not change very much until the 20th century, at least that part of the village near the church. For here it has gone from being rural to urban in not many years, and where once St. Catherine's Church stood prominently in the surrounding countryside, it now stands amidst modern development. Streets of houses reaching up the mountainside. Yet, if Baglan seems to have been a relentlessly growing suburb of Port Talbot, with its own shopping centre, social club, it still manages to retain some of its countryside features. The Baglan Brook babbles sweetly on its way down the hill, past the church, and onwards towards the sea. There is still plenty of woodland to lend some privacy to many parts of what is a well-populated area. A glimpse into the past reveals a story familiar to other parts of the town, the lost buildings. Baglan Hall, home of the Llewellyns, squires of Baglan, a large 16th century house extended in the early 1800s, and again 100 years later. The hall was acquired by Port Talbot Corporation and demolished in 1958. The site used to create a park. Baglan House was a later building dating from around 1760. For many years it belonged to the Earl of Jersey. Like Baglan Hall, it was purchased by the local authority and demolished to make way for new housing. The upper lodge of Baglan Hall still stands, its crest visible on the wall, as does the lodge to Baglan House, and Baglan Cottage, now known as the Baglan Bay Hotel. Along a quiet country lane leading out of Baglan towards Carmarthen is Blind Baglan Farm, a large building of Tudor origin, considerably altered but still retaining some of its early features, such as the Tudor arch doorway. In recent years, it has fallen into decline and needs urgent attention if it is to be prevented from going the same way as many other old houses. Most traces of Baglan's industrial past have vanished, leaving BP chemicals to dominate the landscape, and factory units occupying Baglan moors. In Taibach, the English Copper Company set up a works in 1770, and copper remained an important industry here until 1953, when Vivian's copper mill closed down behind Commercial Road. Now the site is occupied by the town's fire station. Although Taibach has undergone change, it still bears many similarities to the Taibach of the past. And it is possibly the one part of Port Talbot that has altered the least, giving it a timeless atmosphere. The village is bounded on one side by the Frudwilt River, flowing down from the Goitra Valley and past the steelworks on its way out towards the sea. And on its other side, merging with Margam, is the Ranelcht Brook, rather less visible to the observer, passing beneath Margam Road near the 12 Nights Hotel. What has disappeared from Taibach is the old terraced rows, Constantinople Row, demolished in 1912, and Balaclava, Inkerman and Stamboul rows. Incline Row, leading up towards the mountain from Commercial Road, has changed slightly over the years, some dwellings gone, others added, and still displays a sign for Inkerman Row, seemingly for a lost cause, though in fact new bungalows were built behind the motorway. Along Margam Road once stood a wayside farm workers' cottage known as Tull and Awal. Now it has gone, although it has a road named after it nearby. There was an attempt made to move the cottage to St Fagan's Welsh Folk Museum, but this failed. so it was demolished instead. Perversely, its site is the only piece of open ground amidst a row of houses. Gallipoli Row survives in the centre of Taibach, as do several other of the village's early rows. And in the main street, where traffic and pedestrians seem not to get too much in each other's way, stands the building which for many years used to be the town's central library. Since the central library moved to the Aberavon shopping centre, it continues to serve as a branch library. Opposite stands the old Margam Urban District Council building. The Taibach Rugby Clubhouse was formerly known as the Talbot Arms Hotel, and further along Commercial Road, an even older building, the Somerset Arms, once called Somersetshire House, has a much more modern appearance, contrasting with the historic look of the malt houses close by, which have changed little from the early days. Here, the present is settled comfortably with the past. This is Station Road, Port Talbot in the 1920s, when traffic was much less evident than it is today. An even earlier view of the same road shows how the front gardens of Cortlandt Terrace were moved in order to widen the street. Margam Terrace, which used to be behind Station Road, has gone, to be replaced by the open-air market, but the neat terraces of Gower Street remain, as do those of Rice Street and many others. Some well-known buildings have simply undergone transformation, as in this instance from Oscar Chess's Motor House to Page's DIY Limited in Talbot Road. An intercity train pulls out of Port Talbot railway station, Paddington bound. The railway played a vital role in Port Talbot's industrial development, and at its height, railway lines ran through the town, across it, and around it. The Port Talbot Railway and Dock Company was formed to link the dock with the coal-producing areas of South Wales. Lines ran up the Avon Valley, and in those days Carmarthen had its own station. Many of the works had their own locomotives. Whilst the ground was reasonably level in Port Talbot, once the railway headed up into the valley, it became necessary to construct a long viaduct at Pontrhydyfen, a short distance away from the earlier aqueduct, and a series of bridges thereafter. The central station in Port Talbot has gone now. It used to be sited near the Plaza Cinema. And situated at the entrance to the Goytre Valley were the Dufferin Yard engine sheds, built in the 1890s as a large depot for the Port Talbot Railway and Dock Company, later taken over by British Railways, and eventually closed in 1964, the site cleared to make way for the Wildbrook estate. Now, all that remains of this once busy railway network is the main Swansea to Paddington line, and as the level crossing barriers come down, an intercity express pulls into the station, nowadays known as Port Talbot Parkway, a name which conjures up visions of commuter land. Also, a branch line serves the steelworks and links Port Talbot with Llanwern in Newport. Most signs of the other railways that existed in Port Talbot have gone, the tracks long since taken up, as here at the top end of Annis Street. But the routes that they took have not entirely reverted back to nature. Evidence remains in Carmarthen, and further up the valley near Avon Argoed, disused platforms blend in with the encroaching foliage. The viaduct at Pontrhydyfen bestrides the landscape still. as does its older and somewhat shorter partner, the aqueduct. Aqueduct Terrace, a row of houses that once gazed down upon this industrious zeal, now a casual walkway. The disused bridge stands proudly but a little forlornly, its span removed, the piers gaping open. But just around the bend in the river, there is one fortunate enough to have been restored with a new span for pedestrians and cyclists, a tall, impassive monument to our industrial heritage. When the might of steam gave way to the convenience and simplicity of the internal combustion engine, the A48 was the only means of passing through Port Talbot. Traffic congestion became a regular occurrence, particularly at the level crossing near Bethany Square. The solution was to build a bypass at the foot of the mountains, the M48 as it was called, later to become a section of the M4 motorway. In its path lay the tiny village of Gross, so the village had to go. Now there is no trace of it. It is lost beneath the embankments between the roundabout and the motorway. The heart of the town got its relief, and redevelopment has continued apace ever since. A steelworks has occupied the site of the old Margam Moors built upon the marshes and saltings after the Second World War, but a works was firstly set up behind Courtucker Terrace in the early part of the century. The building of the new Abbey Works took place between 1947 and 1951, and inside this enormously expanded industry, 17,000 people were employed, working in shifts for every hour of every day of the year, a continuous process. Ever since there has been change. The old open hearth furnaces now gone. Parts of the works have historic significance. One of the coke ovens is located near the site of the old Morva colliery, scene of several 19th century mining disasters. The Deepwater Harbour was opened in 1970, permitting huge ore carriers to dock. A period of job redundancies and the changing from government-owned corporation to private company, turning losses into profit, has reduced the workforce to less than a quarter of its former number. And yet, as steelmaking continues day and night, and the town depends on its continuation, the certainties of the past have gone, perhaps forever. The 12 Nights Hotel in Margam opened in 1957 to cater for trade brought about by the Abbey Works. On Aberavon's seafront, the Jersey Beach Hotel, a much older building, was destroyed in a disastrous fire in 1908 and subsequently rebuilt in its present form. Seaside resorts became very popular in Edwardian times, Aberavon being no exception, due to its vast expanse of sand. But in recent years the beach seems to have declined in popularity, perhaps due to there no longer being any amusement activities nearby, such as the fun fair. But young people still find plenty to amuse them, especially with bucket and spade, and the sea is always a big attraction. The most noticeable building, which now stands on Aberavon seafront, is the Avon Lido, which was opened in 1965 by the Queen. It was a day that many people remember well.